I never thought that a simple phone call on a Sunday afternoon would reveal the darkest truth of my life. It was that golden hour when sunlight streams through windows at a slant, catching dust particles in the air, a time that should feel peaceful. I was arranging flowers in my kitchen, the scent of lilacs filling the room, when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me smile. Nathan, my only son. "Mom, did you like the chocolate I sent?" His voice carried an unusual edge of anticipation, something I might have questioned if I hadn't been distracted by trimming stems. Without thinking twice, I replied, "I didn't eat it, dear. I gave it to Heather and the kids when they visited yesterday. The children were so excited about those fancy chocolates." The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. Then came the sound I'll never forget, a panicked scream that seemed to tear through the phone. "You did what?" In that single moment, standing in my kitchen in Portland, Maine, with the phone trembling in my aging hand, I understood a terrible truth that no mother should ever have to face. My own son had sent me poisoned chocolate. I, Martha Sullivan, 67-year-old retired botanist and widow of a Coast Guard captain, had just discovered my only child wanted me dead. My knees nearly gave out. I grabbed the edge of my kitchen counter, feeling the smooth marble under my fingers, the same counter where I'd taught Nathan to bake cookies when he was just tall enough to reach it standing on a stool. The contrast between that memory and the present moment was so stark that I felt physically ill. "Nathan," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt, "why are you so upset about the chocolate?" I was giving him a chance to explain, to tell me this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Part of me, the part that had held him as a newborn, bandaged his scraped knees and helped him move into his college dorm, desperately wanted there to be another explanation. His response came too quickly, too rehearsed. I just wanted you to have them first, Mom. They were a special gift for you." The tremor in his voice betrayed him. In 45 years of being his mother, I had learned every inflection of his voice. This was Nathan lying, panicking. "Nathan, what was in those chocolates?" I pressed, my botanist mind already cataloging possibilities. Foxglove, oleander, taxine from yew berries, all plants I'd studied, all poisons that could mimic heart failure in someone my age with my family history. "Nothing, just chocolate, normal chocolate. Look, I have to go." He hung up abruptly, leaving me in a silence so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. I looked out my kitchen window at the garden I'd cultivated for decades. The late afternoon sun illuminated my prized roses, the herb garden with medicinal plants I'd studied my whole career, the bench where James and I used to sit and watch the sunset over the Atlantic. How many times had Nathan sat on that bench with us? How many summer evenings had we spent as a family in that garden? And now he had tried to kill me. My mind raced through recent events, assembling pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. Nathan and Heather's increasing visits over the past months, their questions about my will, about the house, about the insurance policy James had left, the subtle suggestions that perhaps at my age I should consider moving to a smaller place, Heather's interest in my medications, in my heart condition that I'd inherited from my father. I sank into a chair, the reality of it all settling on my shoulders like a physical weight. My son, my only child, had calculated my death, had researched poisons, purchased or made toxic chocolates, packaged them, and sent them to me with a note in his handwriting. "For the sweetest Mom, love, Nathan." The box still sat on my dining room table, elegant with its gold embossing and satin ribbon. Only 3 pieces missing, the ones Heather had reluctantly accepted when she visited with the children yesterday. She had barely nibbled at hers, I remembered now. She'd claimed she was watching her sugar intake, and she'd practically snatched the chocolates from the children's hands after they'd each taken one small bite, saying something about spoiling their dinner. They knew. Both of them knew. A cold clarity washed over me. Years of scientific training took over, pushing maternal heartbreak aside temporarily. I needed evidence. I needed to be methodical. I needed to protect myself and my grandchildren who were innocent in all this. With hands that had steadied over decades of detailed botanical work, I reached for my phone again. Not to call Nathan back. That would be too dangerous now. Instead, I called Walter Cunningham, my neighbor and friend who had retired from the Portland Police Department after 30 years as a detective. "Walter," I said when he answered, my voice low and controlled, "I need your help. I think my son just tried to poison me." Walter's response was immediate and without judgment. "I'll be right over. Don't touch anything. Don't call anyone else." While waiting for Walter, I looked at the chocolate box again, using my botanist-trained eye. The chocolates themselves looked perfect, expensive, handcrafted. But now that I was paying attention, I could detect that subtle wrong note in their scent, something bitter beneath the sweetness of cocoa, something that didn't belong. I thought of my grandchildren, Emma and Jack, ages 8 and 10. Had they consumed enough to harm them? Panic surged through me at the thought. But no, Heather had stopped them after one small bite each. Not enough for a lethal dose, surely. She wouldn't risk her own children. This plan had been calculated for me alone. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Walter stood on my porch, his tall frame still imposing despite his 70 years. His blue eyes, sharp as ever, took in my face, my posture, immediately assessing the situation. "Martha," he said gently as I let him in, "tell me everything." And so I did. The phone call, the chocolates, the suspicious behavior of Nathan and Heather, the financial troubles I knew they'd been having with their pharmacy business in Boston, the inheritance that would come to Nathan upon my death. Walter listened without interruption, taking notes in a small pad he pulled from his pocket. When I finished, he looked at the chocolate box still sitting on my dining room table. "We need to get these tested," he said. "I have contacts at the lab who can rush it, and Martha," he added, his expression grave, "we need to be smart about this. If your son really tried to kill you, he might try again once he realizes the chocolates failed." The reality of my situation hit me fully then. My home, the Victorian house on the hill that had been my safe haven for decades, was no longer secure. My son, the child I had raised, loved, and trusted, now presented a threat to my life. The knowledge settled in my chest like a stone. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling the weight of my 67 years. Walter's expression was grim but determined. "We gather evidence. We set a trap. And Martha, this is important. We don't let them know that you suspect anything. As far as Nathan and Heather know, you're still the trusting mother who has no idea what they tried to do." I nodded, drawing on inner strength I didn't know I had. "I can do that." As the evening shadows lengthened across my living room floor, Walter and I formulated a plan. We would need recordings, documentation, witnesses. We would need to be careful, methodical, and patient. "Martha," Walter said, as he prepared to leave with the chocolate box carefully sealed in an evidence bag, "are you sure you'll be all right staying here tonight? You could come to my place." I looked around at the home where I'd lived for 40 years. The walls held memories of my life with James, of raising Nathan, of holidays and ordinary days alike. This was my territory, and I would not be driven from it by fear. "I'll be fine," I told him. "They think I ate the chocolates. They'll be waiting to hear news of my heart attack. The last thing they'll expect is for me to go on the offensive." Walter nodded, respecting my decision. "Lock everything. Call me if anything at all seems wrong. I'll have the preliminary results from the lab by morning." After he left, I moved through my evening routine with mechanical precision. I locked doors and windows, checked and rechecked them. I made a cup of chamomile tea, though I doubted it would help me sleep. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one with the view of the garden and the ocean beyond, and watched as darkness fell over Portland. In the morning, I would begin the process of gathering evidence against my own son. I would document, record, and build a case that would stand up in court. I would protect myself and, if necessary, my grandchildren. But tonight, just for tonight, I allowed myself to grieve for the son I thought I knew, for the family I thought we were, for the trust that had been irrevocably broken. The phone rang again just as the last light faded from the sky. Nathan's name appeared on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered, ready to begin the performance of my life. "Hello, dear," I said, as if nothing had changed, as if my world hadn't just shattered into 1,000 painful pieces. "Nathan, honey, I'm feeling a bit tired today. Must be the weather changing," I said into the phone. forcing a slight quiver into my voice. Walter had coached me on what to say. We needed to make Nathan believe his plan was working without being too obvious. "Oh," his voice perked up immediately. "Maybe you should lie down, Mom. Have you taken your heart medication today?" The eagerness in his question made my stomach turn. This was my son, the boy who'd cried when his pet goldfish died, who'd stayed up all night in high school building a botanical display for the science fair because he wanted to make me proud. Now he was fishing for symptoms of poisoning. "Yes, I took it this morning. I always do," I replied, letting exhaustion seep into my tone. The chocolate was delicious, by the way. Such a thoughtful gift. A pause. You ate some after all?" "Just one piece before bed last night. So rich. I'm saving the rest for special occasions." His breathing changed, quicker, shallower. "Which one did you eat? The square one with the swirl on top?" I glanced at the empty box on my counter, where Walter had carefully removed all the chocolates for testing. "Yes, I believe so. Why? Are they all different flavors?" "No reason, just curious. Listen, Mom, I think I should come visit this weekend. Check up on you. Make sure everything's okay with the house." "That would be lovely, dear." After hanging up, I sank into my chair, trembling. Playing this role, pretending to be the oblivious mother while gathering evidence against my own child, was more difficult than I had imagined. But the alternative was unthinkable. If I confronted him directly, who knows what desperate measures he might take. Looking back now, the warning signs had been there for months, though I'd been too trusting to recognize them. Nathan and Heather had been visiting more frequently since James passed away last year. At first I attributed it to concern for my well-being. A son checking on his widowed mother. What could be more natural? But there was always tension beneath the surface. Heather's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. She'd drift away during conversations, examining the paintings on my walls, the antique silver candlesticks on the mantel, family heirlooms that would one day belong to Nathan. Taking inventory, I realized now. Their pharmacy business in Boston had been struggling for years. Last Christmas, Nathan had confided that they were on the brink of bankruptcy. "The big chains are killing us, Mom," he'd said, his face drawn with worry. "We can't compete with their prices, their insurance networks." I'd offered to help then, a loan from my savings, enough to keep them afloat until they could restructure. He'd refused, pride evident in the set of his jaw, so like his father's. "We'll figure it out," he'd insisted. What I didn't know then was how they planned to figure it out. The question started subtly. Did I find the Victorian house too much to manage on my own? Had I updated my will since James died? Was I taking all my medications properly? Each question innocent enough on its own, but together forming a pattern I should have recognized. My late husband James had left me well provided for. The house overlooking the Atlantic, purchased when property in Portland was still affordable. His Coast Guard pension, a life insurance policy that had seemed excessive when we were young but proved his foresight. All of it would go to Nathan eventually. But eventually wasn't soon enough for them, it seemed. The morning after my phone call with Nathan, Walter arrived with news from the lab. He found me in my garden, tending to my herbs, a routine that had always centered me, even now when my world was collapsing. "It's worse than we thought, Martha," he said, holding out the lab report. "Taxine derivatives, concentrated extract from yew berries, enough in each chocolate to trigger cardiac arrest in someone with your medical history." I wasn't surprised. Taxus baccata, the European yew, a plant I knew intimately from my research. Its toxins attacked the heart's electrical system, causing it to simply stop. The death would appear natural in a 67-year-old woman with a family history of heart disease. No autopsy would likely be performed. "Nathan's a pharmacist," I said quietly, pinching off a dead leaf from my rosemary plant. "He would know how to extract and concentrate the compounds. And the botanical garden where I used to work has several mature yew specimens." Walter nodded grimly. "We need more evidence to bring to the police. Your word against his won't be enough, especially given your relationship. What do you suggest? We set up surveillance in your home before their next visit. Audio, video, and we need to get Heather talking. She seems like the weaker link." I agreed, though the thought of deliberately inviting them into my home, knowing what they had tried to do, made me physically ill. But I've always been practical. a trait that served me well during decades of scientific research. Emotions could come later. Now was the time for methodical action. Walter installed discrete cameras in my living room, kitchen, and dining room that same day. Small modern devices that would capture any incriminating conversations. Then we formulated our plan for Heather. I called her the next morning, keeping my voice light and casual. "Heather, dear, I was wondering if you might come by for tea tomorrow. Just the two of us. I have some of James's things I thought you might like for the children." She hesitated just a fraction too long. "Of course, Martha. That's very thoughtful. Around 3? Perfect." The next day, I prepared the scene carefully. I set out my finest china teacups, the ones Heather had always admired. I placed the box of remaining chocolates prominently on the coffee table, and beside my chair, I positioned a small framed photo of Nathan as a child, a visual reminder of what was at stake. When the doorbell rang at precisely 3 o'clock, I took a deep breath and opened the door to my daughter-in-law. Heather stood on my porch looking immaculate as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her clothing expensive yet understated. The perfect pharmacist's wife, projecting success even as their business crumbled. "Martha, you look—" She paused, studying my face with barely concealed disappointment. "Well, do I? That's nice to hear. I've been feeling a bit tired lately, but who doesn't at my age?" I ushered her into the living room where tea waited. "Please sit down. Help yourself to a chocolate. Nathan sent them, you know. So thoughtful of him." Her eyes darted to the box, then away. "No, thank you. I'm still watching my weight after Jack. Jack was 10 years old. No one still watches their weight a decade after giving birth." But I smiled and nodded, as if her excuse made perfect sense. "More for me, then," I said cheerfully, pretending to select a piece. I mimed putting it in my mouth, then discreetly slipped it into my napkin while reaching for my teacup. "Delicious. I've been having one each night before bed." Heather's fingers tightened around her teacup. "Martha, have you been feeling different since eating them? Any palpitations, dizziness?" And there it was, the opening we needed. I let my hand flutter to my chest dramatically. "Now that you mention it, my heart has been racing occasionally, and last night I felt quite faint getting up from my chair. But that's just age, isn't it?" "Probably." Her voice was careful, controlled. "But maybe you should see Dr. Wilson, just to be safe." "Oh, I have an appointment next week anyway. I'll mention it then." I took another sip of tea, watching her over the rim of my cup. "Heather, I've been meaning to talk to you about something important." She tensed visibly. "Oh? Yes, I'm thinking of revising my will, making some changes in light of James's passing." The change in her demeanor was immediate and fascinating to observe. She leaned forward, all pretense of disinterest gone. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I'm considering selling this house. It's too much for me to maintain. I could move into something smaller, perhaps one of those retirement communities on the coast." "But this house has been in your family for generations," she protested, her eyes darting around the room, mentally calculating its value. "Yes, and I've loved living here. But I'm thinking it might be nice to have some extra money to enjoy my remaining years. Travel a bit, perhaps." I paused deliberately. Of course, I'd set aside funds for Emma and Jack's education. The rest, well, I'm considering a few charitable foundations. The Botanical Preservation Society has always been close to my heart. The color drained from Heather's face. "But Nathan, he's your only child. Surely you'd want him to inherit." "Nathan has his own life, his own family. The pharmacy business seems to be doing well enough." This last statement was a deliberate prod. We both knew it wasn't true. "Besides, he's never shown much interest in this house." Heather's composure cracked. "That's not true. Nathan loves this house, and the business is struggling. You know that. The chains are crushing us. We've had to take out loans just to keep the doors open." I feigned surprise. I had no idea things were that dire. "Why hasn't Nathan said anything? I could have helped." "Pride," she said bitterly. "Always his damned pride, just like his father." I let silence hang between us, watching as Heather realized she'd said too much. She attempted to backtrack, to smooth over the outburst, but the damage was done. The cameras had captured everything. Her interest in my symptoms, her reaction to the will discussion, her admission of their desperate financial situation. After she left, Walter came over to review the footage. "This is good," he said, "but still circumstantial. We need something more concrete, something that directly ties them to the poisoned chocolates." "Nathan's coming this weekend," I reminded him. "We'll have another chance then." The days before Nathan's visit were the longest of my life. I wandered through my home, the home where I'd raised him, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where he'd learned to ride a bike on the driveway, and later brought Heather to announce their engagement. Had it all been leading to this? Had I raised a son capable of matricide? I found myself standing in his old bedroom, now a guest room, staring at the faded height marks on the doorframe. Nathan at 8, at 12, at 16, growing into a man I thought I knew. Had there been signs even then? A coldness I'd overlooked? A calculation in his gaze? No. The boy I raised had been kind, thoughtful. Something had changed him. The pressure of failing business, of debt, of Heather's materialism perhaps. He'd made a terrible choice, but I needed to understand why. When Saturday came, I was ready. Walter had installed additional cameras and would be monitoring everything from his home across the street. I wore a small microphone hidden in my cardigan button, a technology that seemed straight out of a spy novel, but was apparently standard issue for detectives. Nathan arrived alone around noon, explaining that Heather had stayed in Boston with the children. His appearance shocked me. In just a week, he seemed to have aged years. His normally neat hair was disheveled, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he'd lost weight his already lean frame couldn't afford to lose. For a moment, maternal concern overrode everything else. "Nathan, you look terrible. Are you sleeping?" He brushed off my question. "I'm fine, Mom. More importantly, how are you feeling?" The eagerness in his voice chilled me. He was checking if the poison was working. My own son, standing in my kitchen, hoping to hear that I was dying. "Oh, you know, good days and bad. Yesterday I was so dizzy I nearly fell in the shower. Another lie, another performance." His eyes lit up with something that might have been hope in another context. "Really? That's concerning. Have you called Dr. Wilson?" "Not yet. I don't want to bother him over nothing." "It's not nothing, Mom." His voice was forceful now. "Promise me you'll call him Monday." I nodded meekly, playing the role of the declining elderly parent. "If it would make you feel better, dear." We moved to the living room where I'd set out lunch, sandwiches I'd prepared myself, nothing he could tamper with. As we ate, I carefully steered the conversation toward their financial situation. "Heather mentioned you're having trouble with the pharmacy." He nearly choked on his sandwich. "She told you that?" "She seemed quite concerned when she was here for tea. Said you've had to take out loans." Nathan set down his food, appetite gone. "It's bad, Mom. Worse than you know. We're 3 months behind on the commercial mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure." "Why didn't you come to me? I could have helped." He looked away, shame evident in his posture. "After Dad died, I wanted to prove I could handle things on my own, that I could provide for my family without running to Mommy for help, even if it meant losing everything." "We're not going to lose everything," he said with sudden intensity. I figured out a solution. This was it, the opening I needed. "What kind of solution?" He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "An investment opportunity. Something that's going to turn things around very soon." "That sounds promising," I said encouragingly. "When do you expect this investment to pay off?" "Very soon," he repeated, not meeting my eyes. "Within weeks, probably." We both knew what he meant. Within weeks, I would be dead from unexplained heart failure. The investment opportunity was my life insurance policy and the value of this house. The plan was already in motion, the poison in my system, accumulating with each chocolate I had supposedly consumed. I pressed further, trying to get him to say something explicitly incriminating. "It must be quite an investment to solve all your financial problems so quickly. It's substantial." His discomfort was palpable now. "Mom, have you been eating those chocolates regularly?" "One each night, like I told you. They're too rich to have more than that." I leaned forward, pretending concern. "Why do you ask? Is there something wrong with them?" No, nothing wrong. I picked them specially for you. Wanted to make sure you were enjoying them." I nodded, then deliberately clutched at my chest, wincing slightly. Nathan was on his feet immediately. Mom, what is it? What's wrong? Just a little twinge. Happens sometimes lately. I waved him off. Probably indigestion from lunch. His face was a study in conflicting emotions. Concern warring with anticipation, guilt battling hope. It was one of the most disturbing things I've ever witnessed. My son, calculating the timeline of my death right before my eyes. The rest of his visit passed in a haze of painful small talk. We discussed the weather, his children's school activities, a book I'd been reading. All while the unspoken truth hung between us. He was waiting for me to die, and I was gathering evidence of his intent to kill me. When he finally left late that afternoon, I collapsed onto my sofa, emotionally drained. Walter came over shortly after, bringing with him Detective Rodriguez from the Portland Police Department. They reviewed the recordings together, their expressions growing grimmer by the minute. It's still largely circumstantial, Rodriguez admitted, but together with the lab results on the chocolates and the recordings of both Nathan and Heather, we have enough for a warrant. What happens now? I asked, feeling suddenly very old and very tired. We'll move quickly, she assured me. We don't want to give them time to try something else when they realize the chocolates aren't working as expected. The next 48 hours passed in a blur. The police obtained search warrants for Nathan and Heather's home in Boston and the pharmacy. What they found exceeded even my worst fears. Detailed research on untraceable poisons, a journal in Nathan's handwriting documenting different options and their effects, a falsified copy of my will with forged signatures, and traces of Taxine in the pharmacy's back room. Both were arrested on Monday morning. The charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, forgery, and various charges related to the illegal handling of toxic substances. Nathan's pharmacy license was immediately suspended pending investigation. The news hit the local papers by Tuesday. Local pharmacist and wife arrested for attempting to poison mother. My name was kept out of the headlines initially, but in a community like Portland, anonymity was impossible. Neighbors knew, friends knew. The volunteers at the botanical garden, where I still occasionally lectured, knew. I retreated into my home, unable to face the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. Walter became my lifeline to the outside world, bringing groceries, handling reporters who showed up at my door, screening my calls. The hardest call to make was to Emma and Jack, my grandchildren. They were staying with Heather's sister in New Hampshire, shielded from the worst of the media coverage, but still aware that something terrible had happened. How do you explain to children that their parents tried to murder their grandmother, that their future had been irrevocably altered by greed and desperation? In the end, I told them a simplified version of the truth. Their parents had made a terrible mistake because they were worried about money, and they would be away for a while. I promised that I would always be there for them, that my home was their home for as long as they needed. As the initial shock began to fade, I found myself consumed by a single question. Why? What had transformed my son from the caring, ethical person I thought I'd raised into someone capable of planning my death? Was it a gradual erosion of values under financial pressure? Was it Heather's influence? Or had there always been this capacity for darkness within him, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? I needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. I requested a visit to the Cumberland County Jail, where Nathan was being held awaiting trial. The process was lengthy. Background checks, paperwork, approval from both his attorney and the prosecutor. 3 weeks after his arrest, I finally sat across from my son in a sterile visitation room, separated by plexiglass that seemed both too solid and too fragile for the weight of what lay between us. Nathan's appearance shocked me. The well-groomed pharmacist was gone, replaced by a gaunt stranger in an orange jumpsuit. His eyes, so like his father's, were hollow with dark circles beneath them. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the phone on his side of the barrier. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't think you'd come. I studied him, searching for the son I'd raised in this diminished figure. I needed to understand why, Nathan. Why would you try to kill me? Was the money really worth more than my life?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered, glancing around nervously at the guards. "You weren't supposed to know. It was going to be peaceful, just like falling asleep." The casual way he described my planned death sent ice through my veins. That's supposed to make it better? That you designed a comfortable death for me? You don't understand the pressure we were under, he said, his voice taking on an edge of desperation. The bank was going to take everything. The pharmacy, our home, the kids' college funds, all gone. Heather's father had already bailed us out twice. He refused a third time. And you never thought to come to me? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the storm inside me. Your own mother? He looked away, shame briefly crossing his features. After Dad died, I couldn't ask you for money. I'm supposed to be the provider now, the man of the family. And then Heather started talking about your house, about how it was too big for just one person, about the insurance policy. So it was Heather's idea? I interrupted, needing to know where this poison had originated. Nathan hesitated, loyalty to his wife battling with self-preservation. It was a mutual decision. We were desperate, Mom. You have to understand that. No, Nathan, I don't have to understand planning a murder. I leaned closer to the glass. What I need to understand is how my son, the boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a beetle, who volunteered at the animal shelter throughout high school, became capable of this. He had no answer, just stared at his hands. After a long silence, he said, "The kids are with Melissa." Melissa was Heather's sister in New Hampshire. For now, I filed for emergency custody. Given the circumstances, it's likely to be granted. Panic flashed across his face. You take my children? Someone has to care for them while their parents are in prison, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Would you prefer they go into the foster system? No, of course not. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. It's just, this is all happening so fast. A month ago we were a normal family. A month ago you were plotting my murder, I corrected him. There was nothing normal about that. Our conversations circled painfully after that, Nathan alternating between self-pity and tentative justifications, me pressing for the clarity I'd come seeking. When our time was nearly up, I asked the question that had haunted me most. The chocolates, I said. Did you make them yourself? Or did Heather? Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps. I handled that part. The formula, the dosage calculations. My background made it easier. And you chose taxine because it mimics heart failure, he admitted quietly. With your history, no one would question it. It would have been seen as natural causes. So clinical, so calculated. My son, the pharmacist, applying his education to ending my life. One last thing, I said, as the guard signaled our time was ending. Was it worth it? If I had died as planned, if you'd gotten away with it, could you have lived with yourself? Nathan stared at me for a long moment, something like the sun I remembered briefly visible behind his eyes. I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know. As I left the jail that day, a cold rain had begun to fall over Portland, matching my internal landscape. I had my answers, but they brought no peace. The calculated nature of their plan, the weeks or months of planning that must have gone into it. This was no crime of passion or momentary weakness. My son and his wife had sat at their kitchen table and discussed the best way to kill me. Detective Rodriguez was waiting in her car outside the jail. She'd offered to drive me, concerned about my state of mind after the visit. As I slid into the passenger seat, I noticed a folder on the dashboard. New evidence? I asked, grateful for the distraction from my thoughts. She nodded, her expression unreadable. The forensics team found something interesting when they examined Nathan's computer more thoroughly. I was going to call you about it tomorrow, but since you're here, she handed me the folder. Take a look. Inside was a printout of an email exchange between Nathan and someone named Dr. Marcus Chen at Boston University Medical Center. The subject line read, Unusual symptoms in elderly patient with cardiac history. I scanned the emails, my confusion growing with each paragraph. Nathan had described my supposed symptoms to this doctor: fatigue, occasional dizziness, numbness in the extremities. But these weren't fabrications for his poisoning plan. These were actual symptoms I'd experienced intermittently over the past year. Symptoms I'd mentioned casually to him during phone calls. Doctor, Chen's response was detailed and concerned. The symptoms you described, particularly in combination with the patient's history, could indicate several possibilities, including medication side effects, but also potentially early signs of chronic poisoning. Heavy metals, particularly thallium, can present similarly. Given your mother's age and cardiac history, these symptoms warrant immediate investigation. I would recommend hair and nail analysis for toxins. The email was dated 3 months ago, well before the chocolates arrived at my door. I don't understand, I said, looking up at Rodriguez. Why would Nathan be consulting a toxicologist about poisoning symptoms before he even started poisoning me? That's what caught our attention, she replied, starting the car. It doesn't fit the timeline we established, so we dug deeper. She handed me another document from the folder. This is a lab report found in Nathan's home office. He had a sample of your hair analyzed for heavy metals 2 months ago. The results show elevated levels of thallium, not enough to be immediately life-threatening, but consistent with long-term, low-dose exposure. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this new information. Are you saying someone was poisoning me before Nathan sent those chocolates? That doesn't make any sense. Who would... The realization hit me with such force that I couldn't finish the sentence. The herbal teas Heather brought me every week since James died. The special vitamins she insisted would help with my age-related fatigue. The meals she prepared and left in my freezer, so you don't have to cook for one. Heather, I whispered. Heather was poisoning me already. Rodriguez nodded grimly. That's our working theory. Nathan's search history shows he began researching thallium poisoning around the time your symptoms started. At first, his searches were medical in nature. Symptoms, treatments, prognosis. Then about 2 months ago, they shifted. He started looking into antidotes and chelating agents. Antidotes? I repeated, struggling to process this new reality. But if Heather was poisoning me and Nathan knew about it, why would he be researching antidotes? That's the question that changed everything, Rodriguez said, pulling into traffic. We brought Nathan in for additional questioning yesterday. When confronted with this evidence, he broke down completely. She drove in silence for a moment, giving me time to absorb this information before continuing. According to Nathan, he noticed your symptoms during routine visits. Given his pharmaceutical background, he recognized the pattern of thallium poisoning. He secretly took samples of your hair for testing, which confirmed his suspicions. Then he began watching Heather more closely and discovered she was adding small amounts of thallium to the foods and teas she prepared for you. My head was spinning. But the chocolates, the taxine, were never meant to kill you, Rodriguez finished. They contained a carefully calculated dose of a chelating agent, a compound that binds to heavy metals in the body and helps eliminate them. Nathan disguised it in chocolate because he knew you'd be suspicious of any medication he tried to give you directly. I stared out at the rain-slicked streets of Portland, trying to reconcile this version of events with what I'd believed for weeks. Why didn't he just tell me or go to the police? He claims he had no concrete proof it was Heather, just suspicions. He feared that if he confronted her directly or went to authorities without evidence, she would deny everything and potentially accelerate her plan. The chelating agent was his attempt to buy time while gathering evidence. And when I told him I'd given the chocolates to Heather and the children, he panicked because the chelating agent could be harmful to children in the dosage he'd calculated for an adult, and because Heather would realize what he was doing if she experienced the side effects of chelation therapy. We pulled up in front of my Victorian home, its windows dark in the early evening gloom. Rodriguez turned to face me fully. Martha, I need to be clear. We're still investigating these claims. Nathan's story could be an elaborate attempt to shift blame, but the forensic evidence does support significant parts of his account. I nodded numbly, unable to form a coherent response. My world had been upended once when I believed my son had tried to kill me. Now it was being upended again with the possibility that he had been trying in his misguided way to save me. What happens now? I asked finally. We've expedited testing on all the food items Heather provided to you over the past year. Nathan is cooperating fully, providing details about the chelating agent he used and the dosages. And we're having your current thallium levels tested to determine if there's been any change since you stopped consuming food from Heather. I sat in Rodriguez's car long after she finished speaking, watching raindrops trace patterns down the windshield. I need to see Heather, I said eventually. That's not advisable at this stage of the investigation. I need to look her in the eyes, I insisted. I need to understand why my daughter-in-law would want me dead. Rodriguez studied me for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. I'll arrange it, but I'll be present for the entire meeting, and it will be recorded as potential evidence. 2 days later, I sat across from Heather in an interview room at the county jail. Unlike Nathan, she had maintained her polished appearance despite her circumstances. Her blonde hair was neatly styled, her posture perfect, her expression composed. Only the orange jumpsuit and handcuffs suggested anything was amiss. "Martha," she greeted me with the same cool politeness she'd always shown. "This is an unexpected visit, is it?" I asked quietly. "I would think you'd expect me to have questions for the woman who's been slowly poisoning me for a year." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, perhaps. "I don't know what Nathan's been telling you, but he's clearly desperate. Trying to blame me for his own actions is pathetic, even for him. The evidence doesn't lie, Heather. They found thallium in my system, in my hair. They found traces of it in your home office, in the special tea blends you made for me." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Circumstantial at best. Nathan had access to all those things too, and he's the one with the pharmaceutical knowledge." "Why?" I pressed, ignoring her deflections. "I welcomed you into my family. I loved your children as my own grandchildren. What did I ever do to make you hate me enough to want me dead?" For a moment her mask slipped, revealing a flash of the coldness beneath. "You really don't see it, do you? Your perfect little world, your perfect little life, the house by the ocean, the respected career, the adoring son. Even after James died, you just carried on, independent and self-sufficient. And that's why you wanted me dead? Because I was managing after my husband's death? Because Nathan would never break free as long as you were the center of his universe?" Her voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composure. "It was always, 'Mom this,' and Mom would know that. He measured every decision against what you would think, what you would say. We were drowning in debt, our business failing, and still he wouldn't consider selling that mausoleum you call a home because Mom loves it there." I stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. "You were jealous of me, of my relationship with my son. I was realistic," she countered. "As long as you were alive, Nathan would never become his own man. He would always be your little boy running to Mommy for approval. The business was failing because he wouldn't make hard decisions that might disappoint you. Our marriage was strained because he put your needs above mine, above our children's. So you decided to kill me. I stated it as the simple, horrible fact it was. I decided to free him," she corrected, her eyes now blazing with a conviction that chilled me. "A quick, painless death for you. A fresh start for us. The insurance money would have saved the business. The house would have given us financial security, and Nathan would finally have been free of your shadow." Detective Rodriguez, who had been silently observing from the corner, stepped forward. "Mrs. Montgomery, I should remind you that this conversation is being recorded and could be used as evidence in your trial." Heather's mask slipped back into place, her expression once again carefully neutral. "I'm simply explaining my perspective to my mother-in-law. I've admitted nothing, but she had. In her justifications, in her rationalization of attempted murder as an act of liberation, she had revealed everything." I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the weight of these revelations. "For what it's worth," I said as I prepared to leave, "if Nathan had simply asked, I would have given him anything he needed. Not because he's my little boy, but because that's what family does. We help each other through difficult times. We don't poison each other, Heather. We don't call murder freedom." As I walked out, her carefully constructed composure finally cracked. "He'll never forgive you for this," she called after me. "When he realizes what you've done, turning his children against him, he'll hate you." I didn't turn back. There was nothing more to say to the woman who had methodically tried to end my life, who had corrupted my family with her poisonous jealousy. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak autumn sunshine broke through the clouds. Detective Rodriguez walked me to her car in silence, giving me space to process what had just happened. "I need to see Nathan again," I said as we drove away from the jail. "I need to hear the truth from him directly." Rodriguez nodded. "I've already arranged it. He's been moved to a different facility while cooperating with the investigation. We can go there now if you're up to it." I was beyond exhaustion, beyond shock, beyond grief. But I needed to know, had my son truly been trying to save me? Or was this an elaborate deception, a desperate attempt to escape punishment? The truth, as I would soon discover, was far more complex than I had imagined, and would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my family. The county correctional facility where Nathan had been transferred was less imposing than the main jail, more institutional than intimidating. I was led through security checks with an efficiency that suggested Detective Rodriguez had smoothed my path in advance. Nathan was waiting in a small conference room rather than behind plexiglass. No jumpsuit today. He wore civilian clothes, khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt that hung loosely on his diminished frame. The handcuffs seemed incongruous with his appearance, a jarring reminder of our circumstances. When I entered, he stood awkwardly, his eyes searching my face. "Mom," he said simply, his voice catching on the single syllable. "Sit down, Nathan," I replied, taking the chair across from him. Detective Rodriguez positioned herself in the corner, close enough to intervene if necessary, but giving us what privacy she could. I studied my son's face, looking for deception, for manipulation, for any sign that would tell me whether I was facing a would-be murderer or a misguided protector. "I spoke with Heather," I began. His expression darkened. "What did she say?" "She blames you for everything, claims the poisoning was your idea, your execution." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Of course she does. She's always been good at twisting reality to suit her needs. And you're not doing the same? This new story about trying to save me, it's awfully convenient, Nathan." His eyes met mine directly. "I know how it looks. If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either." "Then convince me," I challenged. "Tell me exactly what happened from the beginning. No more half-truths, no more evasions." Nathan took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting on the table before him. "It started after Dad died. You remember how often we visited? Every other weekend, sometimes more." I nodded. Those visits had seemed like the one bright spot in my grief-darkened world. "At first it was just because we were worried about you," he continued. "But then Heather started talking about your house, about how it was wasted on just one person, about how much it would be worth if sold, about your life insurance policy. And you went along with this?" I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. "No, not at first." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. I shut her down immediately, told her it was ghoulish to be thinking about your assets when we'd just lost Dad. But the business was already struggling, and Heather, she can be very persistent. "Persistent enough to convince you to murder your mother?" I pressed. "I never agreed to that." His vehemence seemed genuine, his eyes pleading for belief. "But I did start to notice changes in you. Subtle at first. You seemed more tired than usual, occasionally forgetful. I thought it was grief, or maybe just age. When did you first suspect something was wrong?" "About 8 months ago. You mentioned numbness in your fingers during a phone call. Said you'd dropped a teacup because you couldn't feel it properly. Then a few weeks later, you talked about feeling dizzy when gardening." He leaned forward, intensity in his gaze. "Mom, those aren't typical symptoms of grief or normal aging. They're neurological symptoms that can indicate several serious conditions." I remembered those incidents, had mentioned them casually, not thinking they were significant. "So you started investigating?" He nodded. "I researched possible causes. Given your age and history, I considered several possibilities: mini strokes, medication side effects, early dementia. But then I noticed a pattern. Your symptoms always seemed worse after Heather had visited with her care packages." A chill ran through me as pieces began fitting together in my mind. The special teas Heather had custom blended for me, claiming they would help with sleep and anxiety after James's death. The frozen meals she prepared with extra antioxidants for brain health. The vitamin supplements she insisted would help with my age-related fatigue. I became suspicious. Nathan continued. "One weekend when Heather thought I was taking the kids to a movie, I instead went through her home office. I found research on thallium poisoning hidden in her personal files, notes on dosages, administration methods, symptoms progression." "Why thallium?" I asked, my scientific curiosity momentarily overriding my emotional turmoil. "It's called the poisoner's poison for a reason," Nathan explained, his pharmacist's knowledge evident. It's virtually tasteless, especially in small doses. The symptoms mimic many age-related conditions: fatigue, hair loss, peripheral neuropathy, and with your heart condition, any eventual cardiac arrest would be attributed to natural causes. "So you took a sample of my hair for testing," I said, remembering the lab report Rodriguez had shown me. He nodded. "I clipped a few strands while you were napping during one visit, sent them to a specialized lab under the pretense of a research project. When the results came back positive for thallium, I knew my suspicions were correct." "And you didn't go to the police because—" Nathan's shoulders slumped. "I had no direct evidence connecting Heather to the poisoning. Just circumstantial suspicions and a positive test that could have been from environmental exposure. If I accused my wife of attempting to murder my mother without solid proof, and she was innocent—" He trailed off. "The implication's clear. And if she wasn't innocent? If you were right," I pressed, "then confronting her directly might have caused her to accelerate her plan, or to become more careful, switching to a different poison, covering her tracks better." His voice grew quieter. "I was afraid, Mom. Afraid of being wrong and destroying my marriage. Afraid of being right and potentially putting you in more danger. So you decided to take matters into your own hands." I kept my tone neutral, still uncertain how much of his story to believe. "I researched antidotes, chelating agents that could bind to the thallium and help your body eliminate it. But I couldn't just give you pills. You'd ask questions, maybe tell Heather about them. So I needed a delivery method you wouldn't question." "The chocolates," I said softly. He nodded. "I formulated a chelating compound that would work gradually, disguised the taste with cocoa and sugar. Each piece contained a precisely calculated dose based on your weight and estimated thallium levels. And when I told you I'd given them to Heather and the children, I panicked," he admitted. "The dose I'd calculated for you could be harmful to children. And if Heather experienced side effects from the chelation, she'd realize someone knew what she was doing." I sat back, trying to absorb this new narrative. It aligned with the evidence Rodriguez had found, explained the seemingly contradictory facts. But could I trust it? Could I trust him? "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I asked, the question that had haunted me most. "Why not warn me about your suspicions?" Pain crossed his features. "I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, that you'd confront Heather, tell her what I'd said, or worse, that you would believe me but insist on going to the police with insufficient evidence, potentially allowing her to escape justice." He met my eyes directly. "And I was ashamed, Mom. Ashamed that I'd married someone capable of this. Ashamed that I hadn't protected you from her. It was easier to try to fix it quietly than to admit how badly I'd failed you." Something in his expression, raw, vulnerable, achingly familiar, penetrated my carefully maintained skepticism. This was the son I knew, not the calculated poisoner I'd feared he'd become. "The pharmacy," I said, remembering a key detail. "Your financial troubles, were those real?" "Very real," he confirmed grimly. "We're drowning in debt. The big chains moved in. Insurance reimbursements dropped. Expenses kept rising. Heather's spending didn't help. She has expensive tastes, refuses to adjust her lifestyle to our reality, and she saw my death as the solution. Your death would have given her everything she wanted, the house to sell, the insurance money to clear our debts, and me, separated from my strongest connection to my true self." His voice broke slightly. "She never understood our relationship, Mom. She saw it as unhealthy dependence rather than mutual respect and love." Detective Rodriguez, who had been silently observing, cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Sullivan, could you explain the journal we found? The one detailing various poisons and their effects?" Nathan tensed visibly. "That was my research on what might be happening to Mom. I was trying to narrow down possibilities based on her symptoms. When I suspected thallium, I documented everything I could find about it. Symptoms, progression, treatment options. And the falsified will we found in your home office?" She pressed. "That was Heather's," he said firmly. "I discovered it the same day I found her research on thallium. It was what confirmed my suspicions about her intentions." Rodriguez nodded, making notes without commenting on the plausibility of his claims. I studied my son's face, searching for the truth. The Nathan I knew was flawed but fundamentally good, sometimes weak-willed, occasionally too proud to ask for help, but never malicious. never calculating. If what you're saying is true, I said carefully, then you've been living with this knowledge, this suspicion about your wife, for months, carrying it alone while trying to counteract her actions. That must have been hellish, he finished simply. Living with someone you now fear, pretending everything is normal while watching for any sign that she's increasing the dosage, coming up with excuses to visit you more often to monitor your condition, lying awake at night wondering if I'd miscalculated the chelation dosage. His description of those months painted a picture of a man trapped in an impossible situation, unable to confront his wife directly without endangering his mother, unwilling to go to authorities without conclusive proof, desperately trying to neutralize the poison while gathering evidence. The children, I said suddenly, a new worry surfacing. Did Heather ever? No, Nathan replied firmly. I watched like a hawk, tested their hair too, just to be certain. She never harmed them physically. Though what this will do to them emotionally, he trailed off, pain evident in his expression. The thought of Emma and Jack, innocent in all this, broke through my analytical detachment. They were currently with Heather's sister, protected from the worst of the media coverage, but inevitably traumatized by their parents' absence. They need stability now more than ever, I said. I filed for emergency custody. Nathan nodded, relief evident. Thank you. I was hoping you would. Melissa means well, but she's very influenced by Heather. I've been worried about what she might be telling them. Rodriguez stepped forward. Mrs. Sullivan, I should inform you that we've received preliminary results from the tests on your current thallium levels. They show a significant decrease compared to the hair samples from 2 months ago, which is consistent with someone who is being poisoned but is no longer ingesting the substance. And the chocolates? I asked. Lab analysis confirms they contained a chelating agent, not taxine as initially believed. The compound is consistent with what would be used to treat heavy metal poisoning. I felt lightheaded suddenly, the implications of these findings washing over me. If Nathan was telling the truth, and the evidence increasingly suggested he was, then I had misjudged him terribly. My son hadn't been trying to kill me. He had been trying in his misguided way to save me. What happens now? I asked, looking between Nathan and Rodriguez. We're continuing to build the case against Heather, Rodriguez explained. The evidence against her is substantial. As for Nathan, the district attorney is considering dropping most charges in exchange for his continued cooperation. There may still be consequences for failing to report a crime and for administering medication without consent, but nothing like what he was initially facing. Nathan's relief was palpable, though tempered by the reality of his situation. His marriage was destroyed, his children traumatized, his business likely beyond saving, and our relationship, the bedrock of both our lives, had been fundamentally altered by weeks of believing the worst of each other. Can I have a moment alone with my son? I asked Rodriguez. She hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. I'll be right outside the door. When she left, silence filled the room. Nathan and I regarded each other across the table, both carrying the weight of mutual misunderstanding. I'm sorry, he said finally. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning, and I should have trusted that the son I raised couldn't be capable of what I feared, I replied. We both made mistakes, Nathan. Where do we go from here? He asked, vulnerability evident in his voice. I reached across the table and took his hand, my first voluntary physical contact with him since discovering the chocolates. His fingers tightened around mine, desperate for connection. We rebuild, I said simply. For Emma and Jack, for ourselves. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but we're still family, even after everything that's happened. Especially after everything that's happened. I squeezed his hand. We've both seen how quickly what matters can be taken away. I don't intend to waste whatever time we have left with resentment or regret. Tears filled his eyes, the first I'd seen since this nightmare began. Not tears of self-pity or manipulation, but of genuine remorse and relief. The kids, he said, wiping his eyes with his free hand. Will you bring them to see me? When you're ready. When they're ready. I considered the road ahead. They'll have questions we can't fully answer yet. How do you explain to children that their mother tried to harm their grandmother? That their father made serious mistakes trying to prevent it? With honesty, Nathan said, surprising me. Age-appropriate honesty, but honesty nonetheless. They deserve that much. In that moment, I glimpsed the man my son could still become, chastened by this experience, but potentially stronger for having faced the darkest aspects of human nature, including his own weaknesses. Rodriguez returned, signaling our time was up. As I prepared to leave, Nathan called after me. "Mom, the garden, your medicinal herbs, you should start working with them again. It always brought you peace." The suggestion, so normal, so reminiscent of our relationship before all this, brought tears to my eyes. "I will," I promised. "And maybe when this is all over, you could help me with the new planting, like you used to." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'd like that." As I left the facility, stepping into the crisp autumn air, I felt as though I'd been holding my breath for weeks and could finally exhale. The truth, complex, painful, but liberating, was finally emerging. My son hadn't tried to murder me. In his flawed, misguided way, he had tried to save me from the person who had. The path forward remained uncertain. Criminal proceedings against Heather, custody arrangements for the children, Nathan's legal status, all these issues loomed large. But for the first time since finding those chocolates, I felt something like hope stirring within me. Some wounds never fully heal, and some trusts, once broken, remain forever altered. But as I drove home along the coast, watching sunlight glitter on the Atlantic, I found myself planning which herbs to plant come spring, a small act of faith in a future I hadn't been sure I would live to see. 3 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media coverage, and the quiet, determined work of rebuilding what remained of my family. The Portland winter settled in with unforgiving winds that rattled the windows of my Victorian home, now filled with the sounds of children. Emma and Jack had moved in with me after the court granted me temporary custody. Adjusting to life as a guardian to 2 traumatized children in my late 60s wasn't easy. My days, once filled with gardening and volunteer work at the botanical gardens, now revolved around school drop-offs, homework supervision, and carefully navigating emotional landmines. The children asked questions I couldn't fully answer, mourned for parents who were physically alive but effectively lost to them. "Why did Mommy want to hurt Grandma?" Emma asked one evening as I tucked her into bed, her 8-year-old eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy says she was sick in her thoughts." "Is that like when I had strep throat but in your brain instead?" These moments broke my heart anew. How do you explain the complexities of human darkness to a child? I settled for simplified truths, age-appropriate but honest. "Something like that, sweetheart. Sometimes people's thinking gets tangled up and they make very bad choices because of it." Jack at 10 processed things differently. He grew quiet, watchful, as if constantly scanning for threats. His nightmares were frequent in those first weeks, waking up screaming, convinced someone was trying to poison his food. My botanical knowledge, once a passion and career, now served a new purpose as I taught him about plants, helped him create a small indoor herb garden on his windowsill. The predictable nature of nurturing living things became his anchor. On a snow-dusted Tuesday in January, I received a call from Nathan's attorney. The district attorney had agreed to a plea deal. All charges against Nathan would be dropped, except for failure to report a crime and improper administration of medication without consent. He would receive probation, community service, and mandatory counseling, but no jail time. His pharmacy license would remain suspended for 1 year. "It's the best outcome we could have hoped for," the attorney explained. The evidence overwhelmingly supported his account. "The prosecutors believe he genuinely thought he was protecting you, even if his methods were misguided and illegal." I thanked her, relief washing over me. Nathan had made serious mistakes in how he handled his suspicions about Heather, but the prospect of him serving years in prison for trying to save my life had weighed heavily on me. "When will he be released?" I asked. "Processing takes time, but likely within the week. He's asked if he might stay with you temporarily while he gets back on his feet. I told him I'd discuss it with you first." I glanced toward the kitchen where Emma and Jack were working on a puzzle, heads bent close together, whispering conspirationally. They had seen their father 3 times since moving in with me, supervised visits at a family services center. Each meeting had been tense, awkward, but gradually improving as Nathan learned how to interact with his children in this new reality. Yes, I decided, we have room. The children need stability, and having their father here might help provide that. Are you sure, Martha? After everything that's happened, he's my son, I said simply, and their father. We need to move forward. Nathan arrived on a Friday afternoon, carrying a single duffel bag containing all that remained of his former life. He stood on my porch, our porch now, looking both familiar and strange. 4 months of incarceration had changed him physically. He'd lost weight, developed a pallor that spoke of too little sunlight, but the most profound changes were in his eyes, a wariness, a humility that hadn't been there before. Mom, he said softly, hesitating at the threshold. I pulled him into an embrace, feeling his body stiffen momentarily before relaxing. Welcome home, I whispered. The children's reactions to their father moving in were mixed. Emma ran to him instantly, wrapping her arms around his legs with the uncomplicated forgiveness that only children can offer. Jack held back, watching from the doorway, uncertain. Hey, buddy, Nathan said, not pushing, giving his son space. I missed you. Are you staying for good? Jack asked, his voice carefully neutral. For now, Nathan answered honestly. We'll figure out the rest as we go. That evening, after the children were in bed, Nathan and I sat in the kitchen, drinking tea in a silence laden with all that had passed between us. The unspoken question hung in the air. What about Heather? Her trial is set for March, I said finally, addressing the elephant in the room. The prosecutor says the case is strong. Multiple counts of attempted murder, evidence of premeditation, the falsified will. Nathan nodded, staring into his cup. Her attorney reached out to mine. She's willing to take a plea deal, 20 years with possibility of parole after 15, if I testify against her. And will you? His hands tightened around the mug. I have to, for the children's sake, for yours. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I enabled her, Mom. Not intentionally, but by being blind to who she really was for so long. By not speaking up when I first suspected what she was doing. My silence nearly cost you your life. You were trying to protect me, I reminded him. In the worst possible way. He shook his head ruefully. I should have trusted you. Should have gone to the police immediately. My attempts to handle everything myself only made the situation worse. The self-recrimination in his voice concerned me. Nathan had made mistakes, serious ones, but carrying that guilt forever would help no one, least of all Emma and Jack. We need to focus on moving forward, I said firmly. The children need us both to be present, to be strong. We can't change what happened, but we can determine what happens next. February brought a tentative new rhythm to our household. Nathan found work at a medical research facility, not as a pharmacist, but utilizing his pharmaceutical knowledge in a research capacity. The position paid less than he was used to, but it was honest work, and he seemed grateful for the opportunity to rebuild his professional life. I watched him with the children, impressed by his patience, his willingness to answer their difficult questions as honestly as age-appropriate explanations would allow. Jack gradually warmed to his father's presence, particularly when Nathan began helping him expand his windowsill herb garden into a larger project in the sunroom. You're good with them, I remarked one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. Better than before in some ways. Nathan paused, considering this. I'm more present now. Before I was always distracted, worrying about the business, about money, about Heather's moods. Now, he gestured around the kitchen, encompassing our modest but comfortable life. This is what matters. I see that clearly now. In early March, I received a phone call that changed everything yet again. Detective Rodriguez, who had stayed in touch throughout the investigation, contacted me with news that left me speechless. We've been investigating Heather's background more thoroughly, she explained, and we've found something disturbing. This isn't the first time she's been connected to a suspicious death or illness. I sank into a chair, phone pressed to my ear. What do you mean? Her first fiancé before Nathan, a man named Christopher Lawson. He died 12 years ago, supposedly from complications of pneumonia. But we've exhumed his body at the request of his family, who always suspected something wasn't right. Preliminary tests showed traces of thallium in his remains. The implication was clear. Heather had done this before. The man she had been engaged to before meeting Nathan had died, under circumstances similar to what she had planned for me. There's more, Rodriguez continued. Her college roommate nearly died from what was diagnosed as a severe autoimmune disorder. She recovered after moving out of their shared apartment, and Heather's maternal grandmother, who left her a substantial inheritance, experienced rapid cognitive decline after Heather began caring for her weekly. A pattern, I whispered, horrified. Yes, we believe Heather may fit the profile of what's sometimes called an angel of death, someone who poisons people in their care, often for financial gain or attention. After the call ended, I sat motionless in my kitchen, absorbing this new reality. The woman who had married my son, borne my grandchildren, sat at this very table for holiday meals. She was not merely a desperate wife driven to extremes by financial pressure. She was something far more dangerous. When Nathan returned from work, I shared Rodriguez's revelations. He listened in stunned silence, color draining from his face. I never knew, he said when I finished, voice hollow with shock. About her ex-fiancé, the roommate, her grandmother. She told me different stories about all of them. You couldn't have known, I assured him, though we both recognized the platitude for what it was. Perhaps there had been signs, hints of Heather's true nature that Nathan had missed or dismissed during their courtship and marriage. That night I couldn't sleep. I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the moonlit garden where spring bulbs were just beginning to push through the thawing soil. Life persisting despite the harshest conditions, a metaphor for what our family was attempting. The subsequent weeks brought more revelations as investigators dug deeper into Heather's past. 3 more potential victims were identified, though proving her connection to their illnesses or deaths after so many years would be challenging. The media seized on the story, dubbing Heather the Botanical Black Widow in lurid headlines that made me cringe. In late March, Nathan received a letter from Heather, her first direct communication since their arrests. He brought it to me, unopened. I don't want to read it alone, he admitted. We sat together at the kitchen table, the children safely at school, as he opened the envelope with trembling hands. The letter inside was several pages long, written in Heather's precise, elegant handwriting. Nathan, it began, by now they've told you about Christopher, about the others. You're wondering if anything between us was real, if I ever loved you or the children. What followed was not a confession or an apology, but a chilling justification. Heather described her actions as necessary corrections to a world that had denied her what she deserved. Christopher had been weak, unambitious. Her grandmother had lived long enough. I was an obstacle to our financial security. She expressed no remorse, only regret at being caught. The most disturbing passage came near the end. The children will understand someday, especially Emma. She has my insight, my clarity. Watch her carefully, Nathan. She might surprise you. Nathan set the letter down, visibly shaken. She's suggesting Emma might... He couldn't finish the thought. It's manipulation, I said firmly. One last attempt to hurt us, to plant seeds of doubt and fear. Emma is a normal, healthy 8-year-old girl who happens to look like her mother, nothing more. But Nathan insisted on having Emma evaluated by a child psychologist, not because he believed Heather's insinuation, but because he needed confirmation that her poisonous influence hadn't affected our daughter. The psychologist found nothing concerning, just a little girl processing significant trauma, as well as could be expected. In April, Heather accepted a plea deal, 30 years without possibility of parole, in exchange for a full confession to my poisoning and the death of Christopher Lawson. The other suspected cases remained open investigations, but it was unlikely she would ever walk free again. With her plea, a chapter closed. The media attention gradually faded. Spring bloomed fully in my garden, where Nathan and the children helped me plant new herbs and flowers, life continuing its cycle despite everything. One warm evening in May, as the children played in the yard and Nathan grilled dinner on the patio, I found myself watching them with a profound sense of gratitude, not for the pain we'd endured, but for the family that remained, battered but intact in the ways that mattered most. Jack had designed an elaborate watering system for his herb garden, pride evident in his detailed explanations to anyone who would listen. Emma had started ballet lessons, her natural grace reminiscent of Heather's but channeled into something beautiful and innocent. And Nathan, my son who had nearly lost everything, was slowly finding his way back to himself, a self perhaps wiser and more authentic than before. "Penny for your thoughts?" Nathan asked, joining me on the porch steps. "Just thinking about journeys," I replied. "How rarely they take us where we expect to go." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. When Dad died, I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to our family. I couldn't imagine anything more painful. He looked out at Emma and Jack, now chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. I was wrong about that, but I was also wrong about how much strength we had left in us. The evening breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs from the corner of the yard, the bushes James had planted on our 20th anniversary. I closed my eyes briefly, allowing myself to imagine him here with us, witnessing this hard-won peace. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Nathan asked quietly, a vulnerability in his voice that reminded me of him as a child. I looked at my son, flawed, human, trying his best to rebuild what had been broken. At my grandchildren, resilient despite the trauma they'd endured. At the home that had witnessed both our deepest pain and our gradual healing. "I think," I said carefully, "that okay looks different now than it once did. But yes, we'll find our way there." As twilight deepened into night, we called the children in for dinner. Sitting around the table that had belonged to my parents in the house where I'd lived most of my life, I felt the threads of our story, frayed and knotted as they were, being rewoven into something new. The path that had brought us here was unimaginable. Betrayal, poison, near death, imprisonment. A journey I would never have chosen. Yet looking at the faces of those I loved most in the world, I found myself oddly grateful. Not for the trauma itself, but for the clarity it had brought. The stripping away of pretense and performance to reveal what truly mattered. My son called me once to ask if I'd enjoyed the chocolate he sent. And in that moment, a painful truth was revealed. But it wasn't the end of our story. Only a dark chapter in a narrative still unfolding, still holding possibility for redemption, for joy, for life after near death. Outside my window, the garden waited for tomorrow's tending. Inside, my family gathered close, broken but healing, and I, Martha Sullivan, botanist, mother, survivor, held them all in my heart, past, present, and whatever uncertain future lay ahead. Looking back at the path that brought me here, standing in my garden as summer blooms around me, it's difficult to believe how dramatically my life changed with a single phone call. "Mom, did you like the chocolate I sent?" Those innocent-sounding words revealed a darkness I never imagined existed in my family. They began a journey through betrayal, investigation, imprisonment, and ultimately, an unexpected truth that changed everything I thought I knew about my son and daughter-in-law. What I initially believed was a straightforward case of matricide, my son Nathan attempting to poison me for financial gain, unfolded into something far more complex and disturbing. The chocolates that I thought contained deadly taxine were actually Nathan's misguided attempt to save my life, containing a chelating agent to counteract the thallium that Heather had been methodically feeding me for months through herbal teas, vitamins, and frozen meals. The truth, as they say, is stranger than fiction. Heather wasn't just a desperate woman driven to extremes by financial pressure. She was what psychologists call an angel of death, a person who poisons those in their care. Christopher Lawson, her first fiancé, her college roommate, her grandmother, all victims of her calculated malice before she ever met my son. I was simply the next target in a pattern that spanned years. The impact on our family has been immeasurable. My grandchildren, Emma and Jack, have shown remarkable resilience in the face of trauma no child should endure. They live with me now in my Victorian home in Portland, where they're slowly rebuilding their sense of security. Jack has found solace in gardening, creating an elaborate herb garden that reminds me of myself at his age. Emma has discovered ballet, channeling her energy into something beautiful and pure. Nathan has been humbled by this experience in ways I never could have anticipated. His mistakes were serious, failing to report Heather's actions immediately, attempting to handle a life-threatening situation without professional help, administering medication without consent. But they came from a place of misguided protection, not malice. He lives with us now, working at a medical research facility while rebuilding his relationship with his children and with me. The legal proceedings brought justice, if such a thing is possible, after such a violation of trust. Heather accepted a plea deal, 30 years without possibility of parole, after investigators uncovered her pattern of poisonings stretching back over a decade. The media attention has finally faded, allowing us to heal privately, away from the spotlight that once labeled my daughter-in-law the botanical Black Widow. I've learned lessons I never wanted to learn, about the capacity for darkness in those we think we know best, about the importance of direct communication, even when the truth seems impossible to face, about the resilience of family bonds, even when stretched to breaking point. My botanical knowledge, which once defined my professional life, took on new meaning, first saving me from consuming poisoned chocolate, then helping me identify the thallium symptoms, and now providing therapeutic gardening for my traumatized grandson. But perhaps the most important thing I've learned is that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the pain never happened. It means acknowledging the wounds, tending to them carefully, and finding a way to move forward despite the scars they leave behind. My family will never be what it once was. How could it be after what we've endured? But we're finding a new normal, fragile, imperfect, but genuine in a way our previous life perhaps wasn't. If you're watching this and wondering how someone survives such a profound betrayal, I don't have easy answers. Some days are still difficult. There are moments when I look at my son and wonder how I could have misunderstood him so completely. Moments when I see Heather's features in Emma's face and feel a chill despite myself. Moments when the memory of that phone call, "You did what?" echoes in my mind as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. But there are other moments too. Jack proudly showing me the first sprouts from seeds we planted together. Emma's laughter as she twirls through the living room practicing her ballet. Nathan's quiet presence as we sit on the porch in the evening, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. These moments remind me that life continues, even after the unimaginable. I share this story not for sympathy or sensation, but because I believe there's value in bearing witness to both human darkness and resilience. Perhaps someone watching recognizes the warning signs I missed, the controlling behavior, the unexplained health symptoms, the isolation from family and friends. Perhaps my experience might save another life. If you found meaning in my story, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to Revenge Expected. Each week, we share true stories of betrayal, survival, and the complex human emotions that drive both. Your subscription helps us continue finding and sharing these important narratives that might otherwise remain hidden. The comment section below is a place for community, for sharing your thoughts, your questions, your own experiences with betrayal and healing. What resonated with you in my story? What would you have done differently in my position? Have you ever had to rebuild trust after it was shattered? Your perspective matters, and your comments help others feel less alone in their own journeys. If you found value in this video, please consider hitting the like button. It took tremendous courage to revisit these painful memories, to share them publicly in hopes they might help others. Your support means more than you know. For those who wish to support Revenge Expected in a more tangible way, we've enabled super thanks on this channel. Your contributions help cover the costs of production, research, and creating daily content that illuminates the darkest corners of human experience while offering hope for healing. Every dollar helps us bring more stories like mine to light, potentially helping others recognize dangerous situations before tragedy strikes. I also invite you to explore our other videos. Some tell stories even more shocking than mine, tales of resilience in the face of unimaginable betrayal. You'll find first-hand accounts from survivors of every kind of deception, each offering their unique perspective on how they recovered and rebuilt. As for me, Marcia Sullivan, I continue to tend my garden in Portland, Maine. I watch my grandchildren grow, marveling at their capacity for joy despite everything they've endured. I rebuild my relationship with my son day by day, finding forgiveness not in grand gestures but in small moments of connection. I remember James, my late husband, and wonder what he would make of all that's happened to our family in his absence. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the children are asleep, I sit on my porch overlooking the Atlantic and reflect on how quickly life can change, how a simple phone call about chocolates can reveal truths that alter everything, how we never truly know the people closest to us, how betrayal can come from the most unexpected sources, and yet how resilience runs deeper than we imagine possible until we're tested. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness to both the darkness and the light it contains. If sharing it helps even one person recognize danger before it's too late, then revisiting this pain will have been worthwhile. From Portland, Maine, this is Martha Sullivan for Revenge Expected, reminding you that while revenge may be expected, healing is always possible. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and if you can, support us through Super Thanks. Your engagement makes this channel possible, and we're grateful for every member of this community. Until next time, when another survivor shares their story of betrayal and resilience,